At the airport, I saw my cousin Leo, my Aunt Karen, and my Uncle Rick boarding a first-class flight to Patagonia, the trip I'd spent years saving for while paying their bills. Leo laughed and said, "Can you imagine Elias here?" I didn't even wave. I used to think saying yes was a virtue. My name's Elias Carter. I'm 32 years old, living a quiet life in Port Townsend, Washington, working as a mechanic. Nothing fancy, just fixing engines, changing oil, paying my bills, and always saying yes to my family, no matter what they needed. Growing up, Leo was the golden boy of the family. My cousin, but treated like something more, the son my aunt and uncle bragged about at every holiday. Leo was the one who made big speeches at family dinners, the one who always had a big idea, brewing. I was the quiet one in the corner, passing the mashed potatoes. Didn't matter what Leo did, he was untouchable. Blew through his college fund? Aunt Karen said it was because visionaries think outside the box. Lost 3 jobs in a row? Uncle Rick said he was meant to be his own boss. Meanwhile, when my truck broke down and I patched it together myself, nobody even noticed. I didn't really mind. I liked the background. It was peaceful, or at least it used to be. As we got older, I somehow became the family's unpaid handyman and emergency ATM. Leo's car broke down? I fixed it for free. Aunt Karen's furnace went out? I drove an hour to replace the part. Uncle Rick needed a loan for some can't-miss investment? I sent the money, no questions asked. One time, Leo called at midnight, voice all wound up about missing a student loan payment. He said it was just temporary, that he'd pay me back. I wired the money the next morning. Never saw a cent of it again. Didn't even ask. Because that's what you do for family, right? At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I lived simply, 1-bedroom rental above the shop, no girlfriend, no kids. Nothing tying me down. Fixing engines was enough most days. When the town went quiet after sunset and I locked up the garage, I could almost pretend I didn't need more. Almost. But there was one thing. One dream I kept tucked away, like an old postcard at the bottom of a drawer. Patagonia. The towering peaks. The endless skies. The dream of standing at the top of the world, breathing air so pure it hurt. For years, I set aside whatever I could, a few bucks here, a few bucks there, telling myself that one day I'd finally go. I'd be the guy who didn't just dream about things. I'd be the guy who did them. But every time my savings account started to look hopeful, something came up. Leo's startup hit a rough patch. Uncle Rick needed a little bridge loan. Aunt Karen couldn't afford the dental work. And every time, I opened my wallet without thinking twice. After all, I didn't have a wife or a mortgage or little league fees. Just a dream. A silly, selfish dream. At least, that's what I told myself. Every time I watched the balance drain away. I didn't tell anyone I booked the trip. No big announcement, no farewell party. Just a quiet click on a budget airline website and a confirmation email to myself. It felt good. Secret. Like I was finally doing something that was mine. I packed light, a weatherproof duffel, some hiking boots, a worn jacket I'd had since college. I got to the Seattle airport 4 hours early, too wired to sit at home any longer. Sitting in the crowded terminal, surrounded by people with shiny luggage and fancy backpacks, I could already picture the snow-dusted mountains waiting for me. I was halfway through a stale coffee when I heard it, a loud laugh that turned my stomach inside out. It was Leo. I looked up, and there they were, Leo, Aunt Karen, Uncle Rick, breezing through the terminal like they owned the place. Matching Patagonia jackets, designer hiking boots, expensive backpacks, and behind them, a travel guide in a crisp uniform waving a clipboard. I sat frozen, half hiding behind a potted plant. They didn't even glance my way. Leo was laughing, that same high-pitched cackle he used when he thought he was being clever. "Can you imagine Elias here?" he said, nudging Uncle Rick. He'd hate all this fancy crap. They all laughed. Hard. Like it was the funniest thing they'd heard in years. Aunt Karen wiped a tear from her eye, still chuckling. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. There it was. The truth, ugly and plain. The family who cried poor every time I mentioned my dream trip had somehow found enough cash to take the exact adventure I had spent years postponing for their sake. And not only that, they were glad I wasn't coming. I watched as they sauntered over to the first-class line, handing over passports with wide, easy smiles. Leo turned, raising his arm to take a group selfie, all of them flashing bright grins like a toothpaste commercial. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't call out. I just sat there, feeling smaller than I had in years. My boarding call came 15 minutes later. Gate 46. Economy line. I stood up, slung my duffel over my shoulder, and walked toward my gate. No text to Aunt Karen to let her know I saw them. No good luck messages to Leo. No quiet self-blame about how I must have misunderstood. For once, I didn't explain it away. As I handed my ticket to the agent and stepped onto the narrow, crowded plane, I told myself something new. I don't owe them anything anymore. It was just a whisper of a thought, a tiny seed planted deep. But it was there. The mountains didn't care who I was. They didn't know about Leo or Aunt Karen or the 1,000 little humiliations I'd swallowed over the years. Out there, it was just rock, sky, and the sound of my boots crunching over gravel. I hiked alone most days, following thin trails that snaked up into the cliffs. Sometimes I didn't see another soul for hours. I breathed deeper than I had in years. My legs ached. My hands blistered. I slept under a cheap tent that leaked when it rained. And still, I felt lighter. Except at night, when the memory of that airport scene kept replaying in my head. Leo's voice. The laughter. Aunt Karen wiping tears from her eyes. It would catch me off guard, a little stab in the ribs when I was boiling instant noodles or patching a hole in my gear. I tried pushing it away, but it clung to me like wet clothes. 3 days into the trek, my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Karen. Aunt Karen. Hey, sweetheart. Hope you're having fun. Quick thing, the brake light on the Subaru's out. Could you order the part and fix it when you get back? Shouldn't cost too much. I stood there in the thin mountain air, staring at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. Normally, I would have replied within minutes. Of course. No problem. I'll swing by when I'm home. But this time, I didn't type anything. I didn't reply at all. A day later, she tried again. Aunt Karen. Hey, just checking in. Love you. Also, we're short on rent for the cabin this month. Little loan. I sat on a rock overlooking a valley so wide it made my chest ache and let the silence stretch. No anger. No long-winded explanation. Just silence. By the third message, a fake casual thinking of you. Hope your trip is amazing. Something inside me clicked into place. I pulled up the message thread. My fingers trembled a little as I typed. Me? I can't help you. That was it. 4 words. No apology. No justifications. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I turned the phone off and shoved it deep into my backpack. For the first time in my life, I had said no. It wasn't dramatic. There was no satisfying boom of thunder or applause from the heavens. Just a steady, unfamiliar calm settling into my bones. I hiked another 3 miles that afternoon, up a steep incline that left my thighs burning. I pitched my tent on a little shelf of rock under a sky so full of stars it didn't look real. As I zipped into my sleeping bag, I realized something else. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was just done. Done carrying everyone else's weight. And for the first time since I could remember, I slept all the way through the night. When I turned my phone back on 3 days later, it almost caught fire in my hand. 34 missed calls. 24 text messages. The first few were still sugary sweet. Aunt Karen. Hey honey, just checking in. Hope you're okay. Uncle Rick. Need you to look at the cabin roof when you're back. Just a tiny leak. Shouldn't be a big deal. Then came the guilt trips. Leo, you know we're family, right? Family helps family. Aunt Karen, we're in a bind here. It's not like we're asking for much. Then the desperation. Leo, can't make rent this month. Serious this time. Please, man. Aunt Karen, the roof is getting worse. Mole maybe? We really need you. I sat on a boulder at the edge of a glacier-fed lake, letting the cool air whip against my face, and read every word without replying. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel smug. I just felt sad. Sad that it had taken me so long to see things for what they were. Sad that no one seemed to care how I was doing. Only what I could do for them. 2 more messages rolled in while I sat there. Leo, you've changed, man. Aunt Karen. How could you do this to us after everything we've done for you? I laughed. Out loud. All alone on that rocky ledge. After everything they'd done for me, the only thing they'd ever done was take. That night, I hiked down into a valley town and bought something I never thought I'd spend money on. A brand new, top-of-the-line tent. Not used. Not borrowed. Not patched together with duct tape. Brand new. The salesman asked if I needed anything else. I almost said no out of habit. But then I added a high-end sleeping pad and a real camp stove to the pile. When I pitched the new tent that evening, it was like crawling into a different life. Warm. Dry. Mine. Lying there in the dark, I let the messages on my phone keep buzzing. I didn't mute them. I didn't block anyone. I just let them roll in. Let them pile up like junk mail I didn't have to open anymore. Maybe some part of me was still braced for a final explosion. Some furious voicemail from Aunt Karen. Some long, tearful guilt trip from Leo. But none of it mattered. I had said no once. And once was enough to change everything. I was back in Port Townsend about a week later, easing back into my regular life. The garage smelled like motor oil and old tires, comfort food for my nose. I wiped down my workbench, sorting bolts into neat little trays, when I heard the shop door slam open behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Leo's voice cracked across the concrete floor, loud enough to rattle the hanging tools. You're punishing us for being happy without you. I set a socket wrench on the bench and finally turned. He looked rough. Shadows under his eyes. Shirt rumpled like he'd slept in it. The flashy charm he always wore like a second skin was gone. I'm not punishing anyone, I said calmly. I'm just not handing over my wallet anymore. Leo stalked closer, hands flying as he spoke. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like we used you. Like you didn't choose to help all those times. I did choose, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. And I'm choosing something different now. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. You're unbelievable. You think you're better than us now? Just because you spent a week playing Mountain Man. I leaned back against the workbench, crossing my arms. When have you ever helped me, Leo? Huh? When's the last time you called to ask how I was doing? When's the last time you needed something that wasn't money or free labor? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face flushed deep red. You don't think about me at all, I said, voice low. You think about what I can do for you. That's it. Leo jabbed a finger at me. That's not true. We're family. I shrugged. Funny. Family's supposed to care even when there's nothing to take. He stared at me, chest heaving like he wanted to swing at something but didn't know how. I saw the wheels turning behind his eyes, the old tricks firing up. Guilt. Anger. Blame. You're selfish, he finally spat. You're the reason Uncle Rick's behind on the cabin mortgage. You're the reason Aunt Karen's stressed out of her mind. You're the reason everything's falling apart. The words hit like stones. Or at least they would have, once. Now, they just sounded tired. I pushed off the bench, walked over to the shop door, and opened it wide. You need to leave, Leo. He didn't move right away. Just stood there, vibrating with anger, like he thought he could shame me into backing down. But I didn't flinch. I didn't fill the silence with apologies or explanations like I used to. I just stood there. After a few seconds, Leo swore under his breath, shoved his hands into his pockets, and stormed out into the bright afternoon light. The door swung shut behind him with a satisfying thud. I stood there a moment longer, breathing in the smell of motor oil and freedom. Then I went back to work, the way I should have done years ago. It was a few days after Leo stormed out when the call came. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello. It was Aunt Karen. Her voice came through thin and shaking, like a bad radio signal. Elias, sweetheart, she said, putting on her best concerned mother tone, the one she used when she wanted something. We need to talk. I said nothing, just waited. There was a shaky breath on the other end of the line. Then she launched into it. We're behind on the mortgage payments, she said. On the cabin. If we miss another, they're going to start foreclosure. I could picture it, the cabin with the sagging porch and the moldy roof they hadn't maintained in years. The place I'd quietly paid property taxes on more than once. You have to understand, Aunt Karen continued, voice catching, we've always counted on you. We're family, Elias. Family takes care of each other. I still didn't say anything. She must have realized she wasn't getting the usual automatic yes, because her voice shifted sharper, more desperate. You don't understand what it's like to have a family depending on you, she said. You don't understand what it's like to have real responsibilities. I closed my eyes, feeling a quiet kind of sadness bloom in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even betrayal. It was just the final click of a door I had needed to close for a long, long time. I wouldn't know, I said, my voice low and steady. Would I? There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, like I'd slapped her. And then, without another word, I hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long moment. No regret. No second thoughts. I scrolled through my contacts, deleting every number tied to Aunt Karen, Uncle Rick, and Leo. Then I opened my voicemails and hit clear all. Text messages? Delete. Emails? Trash. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the open garage door, catching on the dust motes drifting in the air. I watched them float for a minute, feeling lighter than I had in years. The world hadn't changed. The bills were still due. The engine still needed fixing. But I had changed. And for the first time, that was enough. Port Townsend wasn't a big place. News traveled fast, even when you weren't looking for it. A couple weeks after the cabin call, I was grabbing a coffee at the corner diner when I overheard two old-timers talking at the counter. Did you hear about Rick and Karen? One of them said, stirring his sugar in slow, noisy circles. Lost the cabin. Bank took it last week. The other man shook his head. Shame. Thought they had money stashed away. I sipped my coffee, staring out the window like I wasn't listening, but every word landed like a pebble tossed into still water. The cabin was gone. And from the sound of it, it hadn't just been a little overdue bill. They'd let the place rot from the inside out, ignored every leak, every crack, until it wasn't worth saving anymore. Later that afternoon, I heard more through the grapevine. Leo had sold his apartment, the shiny downtown loft he used to brag about. Word was, he didn't get half what he wanted for it. Something about back taxes and unpaid HOA fees piling up. Aunt Karen's Cafe, the cozy little pet project she opened with money I'd loaned her a few years back, had quietly shut its doors. Windows papered over. A handwritten closed sign curling in the damp wind. The Carter family empire, built on borrowed favors and good intentions, was crumbling fast. And me? I was sitting at my workbench, planning my next trip, a kayaking expedition off the coast of New Zealand. I'd already booked the flight. A real one, not a maybe someday fantasy. I even splurged on a guided tour for the first few days, just to ease into it. For once, it wasn't a question of if I could afford it. It was a question of what kind of adventure I wanted. Sometimes I caught myself feeling a flicker of guilt. Not for saying no, that part still felt right, but for how fast they were falling apart without me propping them up. Then I'd remember all the years I spent patching their lives together with duct tape and quiet sacrifices. All the dreams I shelved. All the trips I didn't take. All the chances I never gave myself because there was always one more emergency. No more. I didn't gloat. I didn't text Leo or Aunt Karen to rub it in. I just moved forward. Let them figure out how to swim without me. I had mountains to climb, oceans to cross, and a life, my life, finally wide open in front of me. It was a Tuesday night, sometime around 8, when my phone buzzed again. Blocked number. Again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Hello. There was a long pause. Then a rough, familiar voice crackled through the line. It was Uncle Rick. Let's just go back to how things were, he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. No hello. No apology. Just a command, like always. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my little workshop. The insulation was sagging. The fluorescent light was buzzing faintly, and I had never felt more at peace. How things were only worked for you, I said, my voice calm. There was a sharp breath on the other end of the line, the sound of a man realizing, maybe for the first time, that he didn't hold the cards anymore. You're being ungrateful, Uncle Rick snapped, his old temper slipping through the cracks. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. A small, sad smile. Ungrateful. That was always their favorite word. Gratitude had always meant obedience in my family. It meant smiling while you got stepped on. It meant working twice as hard for half the thanks. It meant giving until there was nothing left and then apologizing when they still said it wasn't enough. I didn't say any of that. Didn't explain. Didn't justify. I just hung up. No anger. No big speech. Just a quiet click. I sat there for a long moment afterward, letting the silence settle around me like a warm blanket. Uncle Rick could spin whatever story he wanted. He could rage and guilt and stomp his feet all he liked. It didn't matter anymore. The door was closed. Locked. Bolted. And for once, I wasn't standing on the other side begging to be let back in. Life got quieter after that. No more midnight calls. No more emergencies disguised as favors. No more guilt thick in my chest like wet cement. I didn't realize how heavy it had all been until it was gone. With the extra money and the even more precious extra time, I started fixing up my house. Nothing fancy, just little things I'd put off for years. New siding. Fresh paint. Better insulation for the workshop. Every project felt like taking another brick off my shoulders. For the first time in forever, the place actually felt like mine. Like home. I upgraded my equipment too, bought a brand new hydraulic lift for the shop, splurged on a high-end diagnostic scanner. No more wrestling rusted bolts off the floor or squinting at half-broken monitors. I even joined a local rock climbing club. First night was awkward, a bunch of strangers with gear I could barely pronounce, but it didn't take long before I found my rhythm. There was a woman there, Annie, who laughed like she meant it and never asked me what I did for a living until our third climb together. When I told her, she just shrugged and said, "That's badass. Bet you know how to fix anything." It wasn't a pickup line. It was just a real compliment, simple and genuine. And God, I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that. People seeing me, not just what I could offer. One night, after a particularly brutal climb where I ripped my palm open on the rock face, Annie and I sat on the tailgate of my truck, sharing lukewarm gas station coffee. "You seem lighter these days," she said, bumping her shoulder against mine. I laughed, wiping blood off my fingers with an old rag. "Yeah," I said, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my chest. "I finally stopped carrying other people's weight." She smiled, and for a second, the world felt wide open again, like that first glimpse of the mountains back in Patagonia. This time, though, I wasn't dreaming about running away. I was building something real. It was early fall when the letter came. No return address. Just my name scrawled across the envelope in thick, angry handwriting. I almost tossed it without opening it. But curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. It was from Leo. No apology. No acknowledgement of anything that had happened. Just bitterness. A laundry list of everything I'd ruined. The cabin, the family holidays, their reputation around town. How money changed me. How I turned my back on the people who loved me most. I read it once, standing barefoot on the porch outside my cabin, the morning sun just starting to burn off the fog. Then I crumpled the letter into a tight ball. I walked down to the little fire pit I'd built by hand that summer, struck a match, and watched the paper catch. The flames rose fast, curling black edges, eating away every lie, every accusation, every old guilt. I stood there until it was nothing but ash. Then I turned and walked back inside. The world hadn't changed. Leo was still Leo. Aunt Karen and Uncle Rick were still probably somewhere licking their wounds and spinning their stories. But me? I had changed. The shop was steady. My house was warm. I had friends who called me just to talk, not to ask for favors. I had a kayaking trip on the horizon and a climbing group that didn't care what I wore to dinner. I made a fresh pot of coffee, the rich smell filling up the whole cabin. As I sipped from my chipped old mug, a soft breeze rattled the windows. Somewhere outside, a bird sang, a high, clear note cutting through the stillness. No noise, no drama, no demands, just peace. And this time, I knew it was mine to keep.